Hello and welcome to China Dispatches, a European Chamber podcast that share on-the-ground insights from European business leaders and experts on doing business in China. In November 2019, the EU-China bilateral agreement on the cooperation on and protection of geographical indications, which is known as GI agreement, was concluded. Spokesperson for Chinese Ministry of Commerce Gao Feng said at a press conference that the deal marked the first comprehensive and high-level bilateral agreement on GI protection signed by China. What is geographical indication? Why did the EU and China sign this agreement? How will the EU-China trade on agriculture, food and beverage move forward? In today's episode of China Dispatches, we invite a European agriculture expert and a man behind the GI agreement, Damien Plan, counsellor for agriculture at the EU Delegation to China, to discuss these questions and his experience in China. Welcome, Damien. Before you come to China in 2019, what was your job then?
Thank you, Ziting. So I was working at the European Commission in Brussels, in Belgium. I was working in the Department for Agriculture and more specifically in the unit responsible for relations with Asia, including China.
So then coming to China is the natural step for your career then. So can you explain your role and main responsibility at the EU delegation in China?
So over the last 3 years and 3 months, actually, I was the counsellor for agriculture at the EU delegation to China, so the European embassy in Beijing. Working as counsellor for agriculture means that you are working on relations between Europe and China in the field of food and agriculture. In practice, it means promoting the exports of European agri-food products to China, so working sometimes on regulatory issues like related to market access, but it also means promoting the quality of European food and drinks in China.
So how was your personal experience during your 3 years tenure in China?
So as we said, I came to China in September 2019, and of course the last 3 years were somewhat marked by the pandemic, so it didn't go as expected, but still it's a very positive experience and good memories I will keep from my stay in China. Despite the limitation, I was able to travel a little bit inside China, both for work and for private holidays. So I will still keep good memories of these 3 years and 3 months in China.
I'm very glad to hear that. So what is your highlight in China in regards to work?
So definitely I would give you one day, 6th of November 2019. Why? Because on that day, the conclusions of the negotiations of the Europe-China Agreement on Geographical Indications were signed. So there was a signing ceremony taking place in the Great Hall of People in Beijing. I was there. From the European side, the one who signed was the Commissioner for Agriculture. From the Chinese side, it was the MOFCOM minister. There were many ambassadors from Europe, many ministers from China, but more importantly, the two high-level senior witnesses to this signing ceremony were the French President Emmanuel Macron and, even more importantly, the Chinese President Xi Jinping. So I had the honor to be not only present in the room, but even to bring the text to be signed at the signing table. So after basically 2 months in China, I had already reached the summit or the climax of my professional experience.
Yeah, I also remember that picture. So could you explain to us what is the geographical indication?
So that's a good question, because indeed many people in China now have heard about GIs, geographical indications, thanks to this agreement between Europe and China, but they may not be familiar yet with the concept. So let's start with the basics. Basically, a geographical indication is a name of a product which quality is directly linked to its place of origin, its region of production. So to give you maybe 1 or 2 examples, which are famous worldwide, including in China, let's talk about champagne. So champagne is not only a sparkling wine, it's a top quality sparkling wine made in a specific region in France called Champagne. Another drink quite famous in China is cognac. So it's not only a good spirit, it's a top quality spirit made very close to a small city in France called Cognac. So the quality of both products are directly linked to their, again, place of origin, region of production. So that's a GI.
So what is the EU-China GI agreement? And what benefits does it bring to both sides?
The core objective and achievement of the agreement is to protect European GI names in China and to protect Chinese GI names in Europe, to protect them against imitation. In practice, in terms of benefits, I would highlight two benefits. First, the benefits to the producers of GI products, both in Europe and China. Thanks to this agreement, they will have the authenticity of their products protected in China and in Europe, and they will have better marketing opportunities for their quality products. The second benefit I would highlight is for consumers, both again in Europe and in China. When they will buy a GI product protected by the agreement, they will be sure about the authenticity of the product, they will buy the real product, and they will be sure about the quality of the product because it's a GI product, by definition, meeting some quality specifications.
That sounds very interesting. I think as a consumer, I would love to try a lot of GI products from both the EU and China.
And you should.
How would you comment about this current achievement since the agreement entered into force in March 2021?
The agreement entered into force 18 months ago. In the first phase, we have a batch of 100 European GIs which are protected in China and 100 Chinese GI which are protected in Europe. So that's the first phase, which is now running. There will be a second phase by March 2025, where a second batch of 175 European GI names will be protected in China, and a second batch of 175 Chinese GI names will be protected in Europe. It brings already benefits to producers in Europe and in China, to consumers in Europe and in China for 100 names, and in the future for a second batch of 175 GI names.
Do you have any personal experience with the Chinese GI products?
Yes, not as much as I would have liked to, because I could not visit all the regions in China where GIs are being produced. But I would like to mention maybe, three examples. One, during a professional trip, I had the opportunity to visit the Ningxia region, and more specifically the wine production area in Ningxia, where a Chinese GI wine is being produced on the East Slope region in Ningxia. So I could see the production and also taste this Chinese GI wine. A second example would be during holidays in Yunnan, where I tested the Pu RT, which is a GI made in the southwest of Yunnan province. Last but not least, because I did live in Beijing for 3 years and 3 months, there is a GI in Beijing, which is called the Beijing duck. And actually, I did, of course, taste and enjoy Beijing duck over the last 3 years and 3 months.
That's very interesting, because I've never known that Beijing duck is actually a GI product.
It is actually in the second list of names to be protected. So soon it will be protected as a GI. Yes.
It's really great to know that Beijing will have its own GI products as well. So on the EU list of GI products under the agreement, 13 out of the 96 are cheese, which is the second largest category. Can you introduce the different categories of European cheese?
Yes, so as you rightly said, cheese is an important part of the European, food tradition. And this is illustrated by the importance of cheeses in the EU-China GI agreement. About 15% of the European names which are protected in China are names of cheeses, like, for instance, feta cheese from Greece, gorgonzola cheese from Italy, queso manchego from Spain, or Conte from France. In Europe, cheese is widely produced since a long time, so we have a wide diversity of cheeses in Europe. You could think about different ways to categorize them. Maybe an easy one would be between soft and hard cheeses, which is obvious with the texture of the cheese you eat. You could categorize cheese according to the type of milk you use to produce cheese. So milk from cow, milk from sheep, milk from goat. There are also the blue cheeses, which are kind of category apart with a very strong taste. So there are many cheeses and many ways to categorize them.
Which is your favorite cheese?
Definitely, I would say soft rather than hard. And if I really need to think about it, I would go for soft cheese made from sheep milk.
Oh, that's a very interesting choices. So in Beijing, what is your go-to place for great cheese products?
That's a good and a difficult question to answer because it's actually more difficult to buy cheese on site, I would say, in China than in Europe. In Europe, you can go to any supermarket and you will find a wide diversity of cheeses. You have also plenty of cheese shops dedicated to cheese in Europe. So once again, in China, it is not yet as common as in Europe. First of all, I have to say I did buy cheese online. Quite many suppliers based in Shanghai, when you can buy online and get it delivered, of course, in Beijing. But otherwise, strangely enough, I would say I would buy my cheese in the French embassy in Beijing. For those of you who have been to the French embassy, you may know there is a small coffee shop or cafeteria where they sell, of course, coffee by definition. But you can also buy cheese, and actually quite good range and diverse range of cheese. So strangely enough, I would say the French embassy in Beijing.
Thank you, Des. Thank you for the recommendation. We could have a try and by asking the colleagues from the French embassy. Cheese is relatively new to the Chinese market. What is your observation on international trade and consumer attitude on cheese in the recent years?
So it's correct. The Asian, not only the Chinese, but the Asian consumers in general are not yet very familiar with the cheese. But I would say cheese has some benefits to succeed commercially in China and in Asia in general. First of all, cheese is a dairy product. And being a dairy product, there is an association with healthy food. So that's already a benefit. Cheese is also a tasty product, I would say. So once you taste cheese, you like it or you don't like it, but at least you cannot ignore, I would say, the experience. So these benefits, I think, can be come true on the Chinese market with exposure of Chinese consumers to cheese. That's why it's important to promote European cheeses in China. So we have been doing it as European Union delegation in China. The member states, the European countries have been doing it. And I think that's important because I could witness that when Chinese consumers are exposed to cheese, have the opportunity to taste it, they do like it. I'm so much convinced about this that actually today I'm going to organize a lunch in my office for my colleagues, and I decided to do a cheese and wine lunch, because I know that both my European and my Chinese colleagues will enjoy European cheese.
I noticed that some Chinese restaurants use cheese in their creative dishes. Do you think we will have this kind of food fusion more often in the future? Maybe also a potential market here?
I think it's actually the best way to make cheese popular in China. You cannot impose it to the Chinese consumers without taking into account the tradition or the culture in China. So going for a kind of fusion between European cheese and Chinese, food is an option to be definitely considered. As you know, sometimes we serve cheese with jam or fruits, and maybe using Chinese fruits, dried fruits or fresh fruits could be an option to have a fusion between European cheeses and Chinese food. Talking about fusion, the other way around, again thinking about the EU-China GI agreement, there are a lot of Chinese GI teas, so tea from China in the agreement. And I think there is also room to have actually fusion between Chinese teas in their diversity with European food in its diversity.
Yeah, I'll be love to try that kind of like a fusion. In order to allow all this variety of cheese to enter into the Chinese market, the European Chamber has been advocating for the revision of the national cheese standard since 2009. Finally, in March last year, the National Health Commission announced the revised National Food Standard on cheese. The new standard allows European manufacturers to bring more kinds of cheese to the Chinese consumers. So cheese is just one of many foods in EU-China trade. Now let's look at a broader picture of EU-China trade on agriculture, food and beverage. In the past 3 years, how do you think of the development in this area?
Let me come back first to the example you mentioned of this new standard for cheese in China. This is a good example of a regulatory development which matters in terms of market access. So it's nice, as I said, to promote the quality of European food and drinks in China. But if we don't have market access, if we cannot export from Europe to China or import into China European food and drinks, there is no point to make promotion. So in this context, I'm happy to confirm that the relations between Europe and China are good in terms of agri-food trade. In 2020, so during my stay in China, actually the agri-food trade between Europe and China reached a record level, a total value of 23 billion euros. So 23 billion subdivided in more or less 18 billions of exports from Europe to China and 5 billion of exports from China to Europe. And as I said, we have reached this record level 2 years ago. In 2021, we were more or less stable, just below the record level. And this record level, for your information, is more or less 4 times the level we had 10 years ago. So basically, in 10 years' time, the agri-food trade between Europe and China, both ways, was multiplied by 4, which is good news, both for Europe and for China.
Yeah, that sounds very significant figures. So I'm also very happy and also glad to see that in the future I could have more European agriculture foods in the Chinese market. So what's your opinion of the potential development of and the EU-China cooperation going forward in this area?
As I just mentioned, the trade relations in agri-food between China and Europe are good, as confirmed by the trade data. The EU-China GI agreement is very important. It's an agreement, a trade agreement in the field of agriculture, and it is so far the only agreement we have in place between Europe and China. So we can consider it as a landmark agreement and a good model of good trade relations between Europe and China. So I think that thanks to this agreement, we have a confirmation that Europe and China can agree to work together, to cooperate in the field of trade. So I think this agreement will again be a boost for further EU-China cooperation in the future. Regarding my specific field of, let's say, activities, I think in the field of sustainable agriculture, probably that's where there is room for more cooperation between Europe and China, because both partners have the same strategic direction to move towards more sustainable or more green agriculture. So that's what I hope will happen in the years to come.
Yeah, we hope that EU and China can work more in that too. So as you will leave China in a few weeks, so what would you miss most?
So we talked a lot about the food. So I will still talk about food in my conclusion. And I will refer again to the food I will miss from Beijing, which is the Beijing duck. Of course, you can find the Chinese roasted duck abroad, almost all over the world, but not with the same quality as Beijing duck in Beijing.
Probably we will get you to have more Beijing duck in the next few days. That's all for today. Thank you to our guest, Damien Plan. If you like our podcast, please subscribe to China Dispatches, recommend to your colleagues and friends, and share on social media. Also, we'd love to hear your feedbacks. You can find contact details in the show notes. This is Ziting from China Dispatches. Thanks for listening.